Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare.
All right, well, so we have some new people here. And so before just diving right in, do you want to give a brief background? We've been going through the Four Noble Truths. So we've used some teachings by His Holiness, the 14th Dalai Lama, in which he unpacks the Four Noble Truths. It's really, I think, the greatest depth that I've ever read in one of the texts. I'm sure there's other texts that just I haven't read, but really unpacked it. So we've just spent quite a bit of time going through that. We've actually wrapped that up. So it's an ideal time to come in. We are just at the end of the Four Noble Truths. His Holiness had this talk on compassion, and we're just going to finalize that today. And next week, we'll start a whole new series. And I'll talk more about that at the end. I'm really looking forward to that. So we're just wrapping up that teaching, and we'll begin a new series. The teachings that we try to present, I always like to present them from a Buddhist perspective and from a human perspective. That I would say the vast majority, probably 85% of Buddhism, is just human nature, how we understand things. No need to be a Buddhist. And there might be another 15% or so that if you want to go that extra piece, then we have a full Buddhist path. But we are a traditional center, so the teachings that we give are always from these authentic sources, and to the best of my limited ability, the presentation of them is, how does this work in our daily life? It's not enough to have an interesting conversation. It's how am I engaging in life in ways that reduce suffering, cut through mental afflictions, allow me to be more resilient, and fully live a life that's meaningful, based in reality, in a way that's very fulfilling. And so I think Buddhism really captures that. So we tend to present a teaching, a little commentary, and then different examples to meet people where they're at. So that's our goal. And we encourage questions. So having said that, let's get to the text. His Holiness had given this talk on compassion. And we're at the very end, which I think is a nice thing, where I really wanted to summarize it and tie it up with the Four Noble Truths. So for those of you online, I'm going to pop it on the screen. Those of you physically here won't get to see it. I didn't set up my screen. There you go. Right here. So as we talk about compassion, I think it's really important to understand the difference between compassion and feeling bad for people. Something like pity, or comparing it to empathy. Right now, there's a lot of teachings on things like compassion fatigue. People have compassion fatigue. There's actually whole things on how to not have that. But from a Buddhist perspective, that's kind of impossible. There's no way to have compassion fatigue. It's antithetical. Compassion is the desire to remove suffering. And so compassion activity removes suffering. It can't add it. Where people get confused then in this sense is empathy fatigue. Empathy, I empathize with you. I'm willing to feel your pain. I'm relating to that. I'm reading the newspaper, I'm seeing the suffering, I'm feeling it. That's, empathetic. And empathy, critical to being human and having a life. We empathize with people, we connect, we relate. And it can trigger then compassion, which is, I want to really remove suffering. If I'm empathizing and seeing your suffering, I want to do something about it. And now I'm into an energy. So this compassion, this bodhicitta, this great compassion, it's really an energy, and it's associated with a different part of the brain than empathy. It's actually in the reward system. And so a lot of times people will confuse empathy or pity or things like that with compassion. And empathy can lead to despair and hopelessness, right? I'm feeling the empathy, I'm getting the news, I'm seeing this, I can feel hopeless. And so it can lead to that direction, or we might shift it into compassion. What's productive? How can I be helpful? What can we do about this? And so in that sense, when we're talking about compassion, we're really talking about healthy action that reduces and cuts through suffering, mine, yours, and with a perspective of the long haul. Sometimes we'll endure some pain for a better result. Common analogies of root canal, right? Yeah, I don't want to have bad teeth get worse. I'm going to endure some pain, do the root canal, be better off in the long term. So life has normal, legitimate pain, things that we deal with, and we can compound that through a whole series of resisting, natural suffering that exists. And so compassion is like, in the long term, what's the healthy thing to do? And how do we engage in life in ways that are more meaningful in that way? Oops, I got some more people I need to let in here. Okay. So that's the context with which he's been giving this talk on compassion. And where I left off last week was the idea that compassion, being based in wisdom, that in itself will reduce suffering. That the vast majority of our mental and emotional struggles and suffering are based on just really misperception. That's a fundamental Buddhist principle. I think things should be different than they are. Right? Now it's, I get that, right? I mean, people I know who hear me every week, I'm pretty sure I could run the United Nations. I think I know how to do that. I have no training. I have no, expertise in that area, but man, get me to a conversation. I'll tell you what they should do. I think I know how things should be. I want to resist situations, and I don't think things should be a certain way. And I'm projecting onto situations and events. In sort of psychology, they'll call those sort of thinking errors or cognitive distortions. And so, but the basic principle is that the more I live in reality, understanding interdependence, understanding impermanence, understanding feelings are temporary, understanding that things come in for reasons, I'm going to suffer a lot less. Because I want to live in a world where I want stability. And if I get a good job, have a nice house, maintain my car, get that picket fence up, we're good. And if I eat right and exercise, I'm going to be healthy, I'm going to live long. Except that world doesn't exist, right? I can eat healthy and exercise and die tomorrow. I can eat healthy and exercise and get cancer. I can maintain my car and it'll still not start tomorrow. There's accidents, there's, hospitals, and there's therapists, and there's counselors, and marriages, the best of them. Guess what? We struggle, we work at it, we learn how to work with each other. But my mind will tell me, I understand that for other people, but, my life should be different. Right? And, when you're struggling, suffering, I'll say a prayer for you. If it happens to me, this shouldn't be happening. It's not like this. And so that's just one of a very myriad of core sort of belief systems that we have that create a lot of suffering in our lives. And simply by understanding that life's messy for everyone, I've just cut through a lot of suffering. Go to start my car, it doesn't start. Well, I get into solution, compassion. How do I get to work today? What do I do? As opposed to my car should start. I do maintain it. This shouldn't have happened. That, and then my mind's caught up in a lot of stress and struggle and frustration, which is not going to help me get to work or fix my car. And it's based on an idea that my car shouldn't break down, in spite of the fact that there's auto repair shops all over the world that are based on the idea that cars break down. There's even things called tow trucks. I've seen them, but they're for other people, right? And so one of the great acts of compassion, one of the great skillful activities, is starting to just live in reality, have perspective. And in that way, the more I live in reality, that's one of the most compassionate things I can do, because I'm not going to think that my life should be messy, and I can more productively live in a way to adjust to the challenges and maybe take some healthy steps that would be healthier and provide for conditions that I would have less of those potential problems. And there's a big difference between this should not have happened and I don't like that this happened, right? This should not have happened. I don't like that this happened. I'm going to try to make this so it doesn't happen again. That's productive. But that whole mindset of how it should not have happened. If something happened, there's probably a cause for it, right? There's causes that give rise to things happening. So he just gave this wonderful teaching on how we can gain perspective, and that'll immediately reduce suffering. And one of the skills that he shared here, this is where we ended last week, was training yourself to see relativity in your situation. If you compare it with something that's much worse, this will immediately reduce your frustration. Right? So I think we get that, right? So I can be having I had a call yesterday, a friend of mine. And so he makes a good living, and he has a nice car. It's a company car, actually. And he was out to see some clients, and you had this appointment all set up. And he drove into the parking lot, made his call, and then he went to drive out of the parking lot, but the exit was closed. So he went to drive out the way he came in, totally oblivious that they have those spikes where you don't back up, right? And took out 3 of his tires. And so now he's got 3 blown out tires. It's, I don't know, 100 degrees or something out there. And, he's the tow truck, took an hour and a half. Then he had to get tires, sit in his car for 3+ hours and things. And, someone might say, wow, how terrible. And he was kind of alluding to that a little bit, which I found a little bit funny, because the story starts with, I didn't see this sign that said, don't back up. It was off to the side, or it was, and all that. By the end, we realized, yeah, you drove over some spikes without paying attention. But that aside, the conversation is, how wonderful it is you have a car and the company's going to pay for this. And you have AAA and you have tires. And I remember a time in your life, because I've known him for 30 years, and I sold him an old Nissan Pulsar. I think it was an 82 Nissan Pulsar, and the headlights were stuck up. They're the kind that popped up, like they wouldn't go down. And he had only had a bike at that time, right? And I think I sold it to him like $500. And he was so thrilled to have a car. And so the relativity going, remember what it was like just to have a car. And today you're an executive and you're waiting on someone to change tires that you don't have to pay for. So we can shift from, oh, what a terrible day, miss an appointment, tore up 3 tires, and just bringing perspective back, right? By the end of the conversation, he was laughing, at the whole ridiculousness of it. And so gaining perspective, when we're in a moment and we're triggered emotionally, it's going to be really hard because we're in that. And so this practice is trying to bring that relativity to our lives daily, frequently. And one of the most, I think, helpful for me practices is that idea of constantly cultivating contentment and gratitude, recognizing, that as we enter our house, we have a house, recognizing, that I can walk, some people can't. And one of the stories that was just profound in my life, a personal story, was me being stuck on a bus when I just had bought a car. It was my first car where everything worked and all that, and I had to loan it out, and I'm taking a bus and it's raining, and I'm poor me, really working it up. And the bus stopped, and then a woman gets on the bus, and she was blind. It's just like, this woman's never going to drive a car. Right? Takes the bus every day, can't see. And it just robbed me of my whole, as I was in a pretty good pity growing thing here. And so can we bring perspective to the moments without the exaggerated qualities of what we think is so terrible or so wonderful? Because there's enough stuff that's actually hard on its own, and I don't need to add to it. And so His Holiness here is saying, getting into the habit of really understanding that everything's relative. Everything's relative. Is this a good day or a bad day? Or, people say they had a terrible day. Well, how many it's a terrible day. Did you wake up? Were you alive? Did you have food? Did you have clothing? Do you have friends? I mean, how many good things happened on your terrible day? Or is there something that happened today that was terrible? Right? So it's really catching our thinking here is his relativity, perspective. Incredible skill. My friend Brian used to say, I've never had a bad day in my life. I've had a bad 5 minutes, and I've made it last all day. So some perspective here. So this is an important skill to constantly bring without totally minimizing what is some legitimate things we need to deal with, right? There are difficult things. So gaining perspective with it. Similar, if difficulties come, they may appear enormous when you look at them closely, but if you approach the same problem from a wider perspective, it appears smaller. With these methods and by developing a larger outlook, you can reduce your frustration when you face problems. You can see that constant effort is needed. But if you apply it in this way, then the angry side of you will diminish, and you'll strengthen the compassion side. So that's the key here is, it's a nice talk. We kind of get it, right? Are we going to get it, tomorrow at 2 p.m., when we're frustrated? Yes.
My problem oftentimes is with this theory of relativity. If you are finding someone else who has it worse than you, I kind of feel like that's sort of greedy and that's so self-serving. It doesn't, I think from my perspective, if I can learn to use relativity relative to me, to myself, and not be trying to find someone who has it worse. There's something about that rubs me the wrong way.
Yeah, so for those of you online, Rebecca was pointing out that it can be challenging. It's very common that if we're applying this principle and comparing ourselves to others, that sometimes can put us in kind of a superior position or different things like that, and can be a bit challenging. Whereas we can bring that relativity, just as I did with my friend, where he was remembering when he didn't have a car to he does have a car, and what do I have? But I would also not minimize the value and the skillfulness of recognizing what we have in comparison to others. So we start that with how incredibly fortunate we are to have the life that we do. And then with that often is a responsibility. So for me, I like to remember that there's nothing I have in my life that isn't the result of others' efforts. From the learning how to read, from, people that taught me how to live, to, teachers, to just everything I have in my life is because of others. There's nothing that's mine. I didn't, this body came from my parents, right? I mean, there's literally nothing that is mine independently. You know, clothes, food, education, anything, body. Um, and so for some reasons and certain conditions, I've been granted what we call a rare and precious human rebirth. And so while I may not be better than anyone, I'm more fortunate than many. And then that inspires me to have a responsibility to alleviate difficulties with others that may not have been as fortunate. So there can be a way of looking at where we're not any better than anyone. But yeah, there's a degree of fortune I have. And wouldn't it be beneficial to offer that good fortune to others? So we can still bring in some of that. Hand came up, I think Roxana. Go ahead.
Am I unmuted?
You are unmuted.
This is reminding me of my mother had a baby that died, and the nurse who was attending her told her not to feel sorry for herself because the woman in the next room had 3 children that had died in a fire. And so there are circumstances under which comparing yourself to other people blocks your ability to grieve or to process emotions about something.
Mm-hmm.
Um,
So let me get what you're saying, which is I mean, she discounted the fact that she just lost her child. Is that what you're saying? Like,
yes.
don't feel bad? Right.
Right.
Right. Yeah. So that's the point I was trying to make earlier, is that there is legitimate pain that we need to acknowledge, feel, experience, and not minimize. Often they'll call that a spiritual bypass, right? Is that I actually block feeling a feeling and allude it to, you know, some higher thing. People are worse than me and that kind of thing. And wow, that's pretty harsh for a nurse to say. So
Yeah, definitely.
the training here is that we feel feelings. And in that feeling of feelings, I can empathize that someone else had lost a child if I've lost a child. That if someone struggled in this way and I've struggled in this way. And so that connection is foundational and critical to developing compassion. So as with the middle path, we can go extreme in one way and extreme in another. An example of this is a lot of modern mindfulness teachings, actually. You know, it's a big thing in the West, you know, mindfulness. And so now bringing that in to teaching people things about being present in the moment, and feelings come and feelings go, and these experiences happen and they're impermanent and they're temporary. Well, there's a lot of research now that without the proper context, people learning this, you know, feelings come, feelings go, things happen, things go, has actually attenuating their ability to have compassion or empathy towards others. You know, so because you're kind of being taught that your feelings are temporary, they're impermanent, don't get attached to things, things come, things go. And without the context of compassion, of humanity, of empathy. And so I just got another study, you know, showing me how improperly teaching and practicing mindfulness actually lessens capacity for empathy and compassion. So we don't want to be too far that way. We don't want to be too far this way. But we want to acknowledge and understand that feelings are how we relate. It's how we live. It's how we experience people. And they're okay. They inform us. And then out of compassion, you know, we can share. How do we help in that process? So if someone's struggling in some way, it's really important to recognize their pain's real. And let's validate that. Let's understand that. But let's not exaggerate it. Let's not compound it. Let's have perspective and relativity. I don't think my friend's going to listen to this. So one more thing, like relatively, I mean, just when he got that company car, brand new, boy, I hope he doesn't listen to this. I'll tell him. There was a couple brand new car, company car. There's a like little buff marks, on the window, and he just thought, man, I just got this car. It has these little. They're not much, but they're little. I don't even think they're real scratches or something, a little bit. And he was thinking, he's calling me about that. Like, I'm not sure what to do about this. I mean, my boss is paying for his money. It should probably not have these little scratches, and so I'm helping him work with that, whether he should say something to the dealer, do something about that. At the same time, my brother had just passed away. And so I'm, I'm leading a retreat. My brother just passed away. And so, skillfully, you don't sit there and go, this is not a big problem. Those are scratches on a car, right? Because he was having more of a moral dilemma around, pointing out, is it a big deal, not a big deal? And to attend to allowing him to recognize from his own side, maybe it's not as big a deal as he was thinking, and just do what's right, point it out or not, and not tell him something like, doesn't sound like a big deal. My brother just died, right? His struggle was real, and he was wanting to do the right thing. That's why he's calling. He's not calling to complain about this. He's calling because what's the right thing to do? And that's something we want to recognize. And then after all that, then I got to share what was going on with me. And then, he can be there for me. And then, he also realized maybe not such a big issue in his life because he has other things to be grateful for. So the idea is not that someone's outer activity may look like not a big deal, but inwardly, right, we can be struggling at the same level. Someone in my life, big demoralizing moment, falling off a bar stool in front of friends, kind of humiliating. To me, not a big deal. But the pain or the shame they felt is the same as the pain and shame I felt with some of my demoralizing situations. And so really honoring that in our situations, honoring that, outwardly something may look like not such a big, but inwardly, here we are. I mean, most of us are doing okay. We're not in the streets of South Central LA or struggling in that way. But we have struggles. We have emotional stress. We have family stress. So the outer circumstances, we don't want to confuse with the inner ones. And so what he's teaching here is about this perspective and putting it in a clear view. So we don't need to exaggerate this stuff so much. And we can get away from one of the big, again, coming back to reality, is fundamentally underlying this is if this thing happens the way I want it, I'm going to be happy. Right? I mean, good luck, right? Things have worked out exactly the way you wanted millions of times. Millions of times. And then here we are worrying about this next thing that'll happen, then I'll be happy. That's the insanity. So that is from core Buddhism, the misguided attachment and belief that if I can provide these things, these outer circumstances, that's going to set me up. Instead of the outer circumstances are important to build a foundation for the inner ones that will actually provide me the lasting happiness and well-being that I seek, which is straight Maslow's hierarchy of needs, you know. And yet, we'll still be thinking we need that thing. So let me get to this piece here in the text that he brings up. And so as we cultivate this, so he's making a point here, it requires effort. That's where I left off. Requires effort. The talk that we're having right now, we can get it, it can all make sense. And, you know, a week from now, you know, who's going to remember this talk? So the idea is, you know, every day to have a reminder, here's a day that's not going to come again. What's important to me? You know, what's really important? What if this is my last day? Perspective. Here's a day that won't come again. I don't know how many I have. Last night, Laura, my wife, was going to bed early than which is rare. I'm the early bird. And I was thinking, I want to do a couple more things. And it occurred to me, what's more important than spending a little time with your wife before you guys go to bed? I mean, that's the person I want to be. But if I didn't have that moment, you know, I'd be offering the book, you know, doing these other things. And I thought, no, she had a long day. She's tired. You know, let me make time and let me go do that because this is important. I don't always do it. I just nailed it last night. Okay, let's not go holier than thou. I had a good moment, right? And so that was the realization, the moment that this is, you know, something that's important. And then able to follow through, because sometimes I know it's important. I don't necessarily follow through, but good shot last night. So having that perspective each day and to remember, and then we can have a habit of doing that more accurately, of gaining perspective. And then, you know, for me personally, the big question that I know those of you online, people hear me a lot, is in challenging situations, asking a bigger question rather than complain, rather than, you know, get caught up in resistance. What would be a healthy thing to do? And I'm not asking what I should do, because if I'm involved, that's different. Objectively, in this situation, what would be a healthy thing to do? It's kind of like I can give you advice because I'm not in it. What would be a healthy thing to do? When I pose that question to myself, I generally have a good answer. If I ask, what should I do? Sometimes I don't know what I should do. But if I ask the question, what would be a healthy thing to do? Generally, I have a pretty good answer. And a healthy thing is going to be a compassionate thing. It's going to be problem solving, solution oriented, and gain some perspective. So that's one of the ones that I bring up a lot. Sam has a little bumper sticker out there. What would John Bruna do? I ask myself that all the time. I'm still wondering. But
Are you selling those?
No, they give away. He print them up. So, but what would be a healthy thing to do? So his holiness is making that constant efforts needed. Don't let a day go by and not wake up, and take a few moments to remember this day is not going to come again. Look at the life you have. What are the qualities that are really meaningful? And for me, I like to think I would like to lay my head down tonight and feel pretty good about how I lived. I just need to make it that day, you know, and be a little better than I was yesterday. So His Holiness is making that point. It's not something that's just a conversation. It's not just a philosophy. It's not just an understanding. It's something we want to cultivate as a practice. So it'll be there, and it'll happen more in time. And rather than try to find the location on here, for those of you online, I'm just going to get to the point he makes here towards the end, which is that as we cultivate this mind of compassion, this connection to others, this understanding of our interdependence, harmlessness will naturally rise. I'm not going to wish ill upon others. Like, we're going to really understand, as the point he's making, is we don't solve violence with violence. We don't solve hate with hate. That's antithetical stuff. To be intolerant of intolerant people just doesn't work, right? That doesn't work. So as we cultivate skillful compassion, we'll naturally reduce anger and we'll be more able, it'll just naturally happen. Loving kindness, compassion, that go together, harmlessness. And that they'll arise because it's just the best way to do this. And so at the end, what he's tying together is through an act of compassion, we're also eliminating ill will, we're cultivating goodwill, harmlessness, people are safer around us. And we'll have that ability, as he talked about in the earlier teaching, that as I'm calm and compassionate, kind of notice that around me. It's capable of being spread with others, even when somebody's angry. Doesn't mean that we don't hold people accountable, and it doesn't mean that you might physically have to hold somebody, but we're not coming from a place of wanting to harm, but rather out of compassion. I worked in some violent places where I've had to restrain people out of compassion, but not wishing them pain. So we're still compassionate is to do the things that are coming from that motivation. And then it ties directly to what we call right intention. So in the Noble Eightfold Path, right intention. It's my quick checklist. If my motivation is coming from renunciation, loving kindness, or compassion, we're good. If my motivation is coming from misperception, attachment, and aversion, or greed, or hatred, those are the other ways of saying that, I'm in bad shape. Am I coming from an attached view of me being the center of the universe, knowing how things should be, and attachment and greed, or anger and hatred? What's my motivation? Or is it the other way? So in just going back to the Theravadan straightforward explanation on right view, the three that counteract, the three poisons that give rise to all mental afflictions, renunciation. And renunciation doesn't mean, I have one pair of clothes, I sleep on a straw bed. Renunciation is the opposite of attachment, and attachment being an exaggerated view that this or that is going to grant me the happiness I want. We can have healthy desires to be compassionate, to have a good life, to be kind to others, to build a healthy family. That's all fine. The attachment that gives rise to samsara is the misguided thought that I'm separate and independent, and you're separate and independent, and you're this way and I'm this way, and I'm suddenly in competition. You're either in my way or you're not, or you're on my side or you're not. And that these things, if I get them, then I will be happy. So we exaggerate the qualities on people, places, things, and events beyond what they actually are. That's all. But we do that on just about everything, best meal ever. Oh, we do it all day long, yeah. He's the worst person in the world, yeah. So, again, perspective with that. And then whether it's ill will or wishing goodwill, harming or harmlessness, so loving kindness or compassion. So at the end here of this text, he's just bringing full cycle that ultimately this whole path of Buddhism is directed at one thing: removing suffering. Truth of suffering, cause of suffering, cessation of suffering. The truth of the path is how to remove it. And compassion is going to be imbued in all aspects. If we live more accurately, that's compassion. So when we think about the three categories, if I'm more ethical, that's going to remove a lot of suffering. So much shame, so much insecurity, so much fear in our lives comes from behavior I've engaged in that I don't feel good about. Virtuous actions, greater well-being. Non-virtuous action, a lot of suffering. Compassion activity is to be virtuous. Concentration, stability of mind. We did a little meditation to start. So the more I can be present, the more I have an opportunity to make a healthy choice, to gain perspective, to be present. But if I'm not present in the moments of my lives, then I'm not even there to make a choice. So the choice I was referring to last night, I could easily have, oh, you're going to bed, I'm onto my thing without having a moment. And latest research is, we're not aware of what we're doing about half the time we're awake. So, man, what were we talking about? And so one of the most compassionate things we can do is have a mind that's present, that's trained. So stability of mind. And then the third is wisdom. And then we just demonstrated how understanding things more accurately, you're going to reduce suffering. So whether it's ethics, whether it's concentration, whether it's wisdom, those are the three higher trainings of the Eightfold Path. They're all compassion activity. They all remove suffering. And the vast majority of all the sufferings, not the event itself, it's how I'm relating to that event. It's my attitude going into it. It's my perspective on it. And if I can adjust that, I can adjust my experience. My experience will be different, right? But if I'm not there to even make the choice, I'm just a prisoner. I'm just pissed off. All right. So we got a hand up here, Mark.
Can you hear me?
I can hear you in my sleep.
Just making sure. I've been having some problems with my laptop. Anyway, sorry to miss last week, and I know you probably talked about this, but in this whole idea of relativity and perspective, earlier in this section, just a couple of pages back, a couple of paragraphs back, he talked about coming out of Tibet and the fact that he was a refugee and how that could have been a horrible thing, but that his perspective now is that it has allowed him to engage with other wisdom, the wisdom of other religions. And he talked about how important that was for him. And of course, the fact that Buddhism has become something that's, going all over the world. And he talks about developing a more flexible way of seeing things, helping us cultivate a more balanced mental attitude. And at one point, he talks about the Gospels, and he talks about understanding the Gospels is, for him, a sense of understanding infinite love. And such religious teachings are very powerful to increase and extend our good qualities. And he talks about the fact that in Buddhism, there's a clear way, a clear method. And, he talks about, considering all sentient beings as equal and not doing any harm. And then he goes on and talks about, and I love this, of course, because he says it is possible to manage without religion. And in some cases, it may make life simpler.
Right.
And I thought that was great. And then later on, he says, it's important to recognize that there are two levels of spirituality, one with religious faith and one without. With the latter, we simply try to be a warm-hearted person. And I thought there was such humility in all of that. And, he's just clearly stating, look, this may not be the end all be all for you, but there is a way, a path forward, no matter, where you're coming from, and you can adapt some of these these ideas and live your life compassionately and develop that compassion and try to do no harm. So yeah, I just love that whole last section there. And of course, he ends with, it takes effort. It just takes effort. Realizing that our perspective can change, that we are able to, in time and with practice, to face adversity with a different perspective and with looking at adversity as an opportunity, to grow. I just loved all of that. Recently, actually a while ago, someone turned me on to some 12-step meetings called Architects of Adversity. And I love that meeting because it's just great. And there's a lot of people that go to it. It meets every morning at 7 a.m. So I've been doing some of those meetings too, and they've been really interesting. Anyway, this is about my 2 cents, and I haven't seen you guys in a while. I was binging something last week and I lost track of the time. If you haven't seen it, there's a wonderful series called State of the Union, and the second part of the series is with my favorite actor. Her name is Patricia Clarkson, and a British actor, Brendan Gleeson. And each of the episodes, it's 10 minutes, and there's 10-minute episodes. It's fascinating. Check it out.
Okay, you're not trying to tempt us with attachment and binging, right?
No, of course not. Me? Never.
Thanks, Mark. Yeah, His Holiness really took, he always makes sure that everyone's included, Christian, atheist, that these methods are for humans. And so it was really nice the way he was just pointing out that none of this is just the territory of a Buddhist mindset, and that these benefit all. So thanks for pointing that out, Mark. And he also, what we hadn't touched on tonight, but have in the past, is that no event is all good or all bad, right? Invasion of Tibet, millions killed. Well, okay, Dalai Lama and Buddhism and compassion. We have Stanford has, their Compassion Institute. Just these things spread, that out of difficulties, other things come out. And Mr. Rogers would say, look at all the helpers, right, when tragedy happens. And so events clearly can be terrible events. But even within the most terrible of events, you're going to find some humanity, some growth, some change, some people that will want to do things differently. And so even a horrific event happened some time ago, it's going to have impacts, and there's going to be a different kind of living in the future. And here we are, a bunch of people here in the West having a teaching, working on compassion. If China didn't invade Tibet, would we be doing any of this? So perspective, without minimizing the pain, without minimizing the violence, right? So that's the balance. We don't want to miss that. And it was horrific. And so now what do we do about it? And keep that context. Okay. So at the end here, we take a little time to just dedicate our merit to good things that we have done together here. Normally I pop that up on the screen, but I don't even have that in here. I'm just going to wing it. We'll just take a moment to recognize the incredible gift of the opportunity to be here with each other, to spend some time talking about compassion, how to be a better human being, how to eliminate suffering, how to be of benefit to others. What a gift it is to have these resources available, for the opportunity to explore the wisdom of His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, and for the gift of applying it into our lives. So let us dedicate any and all merit that we have cultivated from our time here together for the benefit of all sentient beings. May all sentient beings be free of suffering. And may we also dedicate this merit for our own continued spiritual growth, the growth of compassion and wisdom in our lives, that we may recognize our own Buddha nature and be of ultimate benefit to all beings. All right, well, thank you all. And as I mentioned at the start, we will begin a new series next week. I'm really excited about it. There has been it's a 4-volume series with Bhikshuni Tubden Chodron, His Holiness the 14th Dalai Lama, going together and going through approaching a Buddhist path, foundational practices of Buddhism, what Buddha nature is and all that. And basically sitting down with each other, Tubden Chodron, writing about these topics, very specifically going through them, and His Holiness about how can we as Westerners with our culture, understand these topics and how they may or may not be applicable in our lives. And so, I mean, there are 4 volumes, very thick books, and they just methodically work their way through it. So what I'm going to do is take a look at those and then bring them to our Wednesday teachings, and hopefully we'll make them as very practical as you should be nicer to your wife tonight, pay attention, and how these can be very practical in our lives, and how we can eliminate suffering by not thinking our car should always start. And, just really thoughtful ways of how do we approach and engage in this, and recognize that underneath all that mental affliction, there's an incredible awareness that is present and available to you. So we'll begin that next week. Love you all. Please be well. Try to stay out of trouble and have some fun as well.
Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om Tare Tu Tare Tu Re Soha. Om